All right, well, good afternoon, Chloe Shelton. We are so thrilled to have you here today for our Preservation Awards interview series.
So
And Chloe,
cool to be here.
wonderful. And Chloe, you are the winner of the Young Preservationist of the Year award, so many congratulations there.
Thank you so much. It's such a massive honor.
Well, the least we can do, your work and your films are fantastic, and I know from
Thank you.
experience that it's the movie magic that we as the public get to experience is incredibly difficult behind the scenes.
Yes.
It is a lot of work, and so what you've done is fantastic. But my name is, for our listening audience, my name is Will Glasgow. I'm the Director of Development for Preservation Virginia. And we have Sonia Ingram here as well.
I'm Sonia Ingram, and I'm the Preservation Field Services Manager at Preservation Virginia. Nice to meet you, Chloe, finally.
Nice to meet you.
And how are things in Roanoke these days?
Pretty good. The film industry is starting to come back a little bit, little by little.
Sure. Yeah, I imagine like everyone, we're just having to adapt to COVID-19 protocol. So when you're on set, you must have to wear a mask and things, right?
Yes.
For sure. Do what we need to do to keep everyone safe. But well, Chloe, welcome again. And we wanted to start off by talking about your film, Cotton Clouds, and just wanted to launch into where that idea came from and the fact that it's set in a historic textile mill in Roanoke. We're so fascinated by this intersection of art and history and what set you down that road. So can you tell us about where the idea for Cotton Clouds came from?
Well, I've always been a huge history buff. And I think the idea really was born when I discovered the Disney film and musical Newsies, which is about the newsboy strike of 1899. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole learning about the real history behind the movie and found that it was based largely on photographs taken by Lewis Hine that was commissioned by the Child Labor Committee. And as I was learning about his photograph series and all of the different places he went to take photos, I found a couple that were tagged Roanoke, Virginia. So I ended up looking into those and finding a bunch of pictures taken just a couple minutes from my house of children working in textile mills in 1911. And I learned as much as I could about those people, where the mill was, the different children, and I really wanted to tell their story. So that's really where it was born, and it was a year of research before we even got to the point where I wrote the film, and then almost another year before it actually got made. So it was a very long journey.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. And yeah, I grew up a big Newsies fan as well with the Disney movie, so that's so cool. Well, and it also goes to show that so often with period pieces and with historic films, whether they're documentaries or fiction, it takes a lot of digging and research, right, before you can even.
Yes, for sure. And it was a very long road to get to Cotton Clouds, but it was my baby, my passion project. So.
Sure. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So Chloe, when I was looking at your website, and I noticed that a lot of your films are historic dramas or based on a historic person or event. Are all of your films that way? And I guess another part to it is just backing up a little bit. What made you interested in film to begin with?
Well, I'd say all my passion projects are based in history. I grew up homeschooled, and I was really allowed to explore whatever I wanted when it came to history. My mom knew early that I liked history a lot, and so I was able to choose what I wanted to really delve into. And when I got into the Lewis Hine photos, that's what I did for school and whatever else I wanted. So I ended up really getting a lot of knowledge. Also, I was a huge American Girl person growing up. I loved the American Girl dolls, and each of them are a different decade. And there's one that's 1904 that talks about textile mills, and definitely that was a huge inspiration to Cotton Clouds. And I have done a lot of history films, and I'd say that's what I see myself doing moving forward as well. And even when I'm not doing historic-based films, which most of the time it is, I still can't avoid it. I'm always including it. I did a music video recently that was supposed to be set in a dream, but it still ended up in the 50s because I couldn't, I could not. But I'm like growing up, like my graduation trip was to Washington, D.C. to go to the Smithsonian because I've always loved history.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, who needs Europe when you have Washington, D.C. right there? Right?
Yes.
So much to
But you
learn.
don't have to explain your love for history to us.
Right.
We totally understand where you're coming from.
Exactly. You know, and being in Richmond, I feel like so often folks are like, oh, the traffic in Washington, D.C. And I think, gosh, we have this incredible resource right there. And you know, it doesn't bother me to make that trip and go check it out, you know?
Yes.
Well, very cool. So, and as far as creating the atmosphere and in terms of your research, and this is a little off the cuff, but like, you know, creating that setting for historical documentaries and fiction films, is it really hard to capture that? I mean, you know, with a typical movie, you know, you don't have to worry as much about costumes and locations and things, but with history, there's so much that goes into that. I mean, does that just add like a layer of difficulty though to what you do?
A little bit, but pretty much everything I have ever done is based in that. The first things I did were based in history, so that's all I know at this point. And I know other people look at it sometimes and think that's a lot of extra work, but I love it. And Roanoke is very rich in historic locations, and I'll see places and just think I have to film something there. And so it made it easier, especially since Cotton Clouds was set in Roanoke. I was able to find a lot of places already here, not all of them, but most of them were already here to recreate 1911. And I think that's just such a fun challenge. And I was able to partner with a lot of local theaters to get all of the 1911 costumes, which was very fun.
Oh, it's a great resource. So is there a particular building or neighborhood that's your favorite in Roanoke that really inspires you, or?
Well, I love the Grandin Village just in general. It's not the oldest, but I love it. And it just so happens that the mill that Cotton Clouds is about was originally located like 5 minutes from the Grandin Village. It's no longer there, but it's just cool to know. But all of downtown Roanoke is very rich in history. So
Were you able to film at any historic mills for Cotton Clouds?
all of the scenes that take place within a cotton mill were filmed at what is an old Hieronymus warehouse downtown Roanoke. I believe it was constructed in 1911, so it couldn't have been a textile mill in 1911, but it was some sort of mill around that time. But it was big and empty, and we filled it. There's my model. We had a full-size version of a textile mill, and this is, my grandfather built me this model for Christmas because we had to dismantle the full-size one.
Oh, you mean like the loom?
Yes,
Or something?
that she works on, yeah.
How did y'all create that? How did that come about?
Grandfather built it for me. I gave him dozens of pictures, mostly Lewis Hine photos, of the looms and the mills. And I told him which pieces I wanted to combine, and he made it full size so that kids were climbing on it and working on it. And it didn't exactly move, but we used a little movie magic to make it look like it did. But I was sad that it had to go away.
That's great.
No, that's incredible. Well, kudos to your grandfather for you know, it often is a family affair to pull all this together. You know, you have to get as many volunteers and friends as you can to pull off filmmaking like that.
Well, Chloe, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but you've worked with the Grandin Theater Film Lab, and you use all of these historic buildings as your sets. And I read that you had one of your films was shown at the History Museum of Virginia. And I also saw
Roanoke.
that you collaborated with Historic Smithfield on a film. But when you were doing all of this, when you were doing these films that were so enmeshed in history and historic sites, did you think to yourself that it had these other dimensions, that it represented this kind of intersection of history and preservation, and would kind of support history and preservation efforts? Did you think that when you were doing the work?
I am always thinking that when I'm doing historic films, and that's a huge goal for me. Before I started doing short films, when I was in like early high school, I did a YouTube series that went around and saw the different historic locations in Roanoke and just gave the history behind certain things like Fire Station 1 and the Hotel Roanoke and the Mill Mountain Zoo. And so when I started doing the short films, I had a pretty good base of where stuff was and what stuff needed to be highlighted, what people need to see. So that's something I'm always thinking about.
Sure, because and you know, in creating these films, you're really helping document that history in a really tangible way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a lot of times we'll encourage the adaptive reuse of buildings where not everything can necessarily be a museum, but can we at least find other ways to use these buildings? But you know, when it comes to filmmaking and video, you're truly documenting these sites, which is really incredible, and it'll live on forever.
Yeah.
So not everyone can travel to visit a site, but they can go online and watch a movie. So it's pretty important to the work we do as well. So it definitely all intersects, you know. And I think what we've found is that, you know, often with and I, you know, I feel like I date myself, but when we talk about like the younger generation and things, but so often there are younger people who I think are really interested in historic neighborhoods, historic buildings, but might not consider themselves preservationists, you know, like that word or that term, it doesn't quite sync up to maybe what they would consider their values to be. But that interest is there. You know, there have been studies that show that, you know, when you ask, you know, younger millennials and Gen Zers, you know, where do you like to spend time and hang out? It's usually in historic districts, but they might not necessarily connect that.
Yeah.
So I think your work speaks to that really well, which is fantastic. And kind of along those lines, Chloe, so, you know, history is really relevant now more than ever. In the past year, we've experienced a lot of social conversations that are discussing, you know, the founding of American history, and how do we continue to make good on the promises of, you know, the founding fathers and where we go from here. And I think that your work speaks to that, and we're curious, you know, how do you feel about the intersection of art and history, and how can that help tell a fuller story, more honest narrative about American history, and bring more people into the preservation fold as we try to do that?
Well, a really important thing for me is to find as much source material as possible. I like to, when I'm doing research for different projects, go right to the source. I like to hear about events, you know, from the people who were there. And so for me, that's an important thing with the film, to make sure that it's always as close to own voices as possible, telling these stories as they were, because they're the ones who lived it and they were real people. I love to colorize old photos. That's the thing I like to do in my spare time, because I think people don't always realize that that's the same world we're living in, because it seems so distant and old and sometimes creepy looking, but they're people and they're living on the same earth we are. So I like to kind of, you know, connect the bridge from then and now. And movies especially, they make something real that some people have a hard time grasping happened at some point, and maybe not that long ago. Like 1911 wasn't that long ago.
Right. So in this, you know, kind of quickly changing landscape and changing world that we're in through social media and, you know, digital means, it's a really good point that by colorizing these old black and white photos, that it really humanizes the people back then. And not to plug it, but this is on a tangent, but the World War I movie that came out recently that Peter Jackson's group did was incredible. How I imagine you're a fan of that.
Very much.
Right. I mean, it really made that era so much more real than it's ever felt before.
Yeah. They shall not grow old.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It just definitely connected on a deeper level in terms of these were real people, just not just facts and figures in a history book. So.
Yes.
Sure.
Well, and we've also talked about this before previously, but as far as young people, do you see more young people your age or maybe even younger that could watch your films, see your films, and then say, wow, I hadn't thought about history that way, or I'd like to go see that warehouse, or where did you get the idea from? That it might spark some further interest in them and younger people.
I hope people are interested, and I've seen people want to go see Hotel Roanoke after seeing Cotton Clouds, where Hotel Roanoke is heavily featured. And I know that a lot of the crew who's worked on different films that I've done are always very interested in what we're filming, especially crew that might not have been interested otherwise, working with the costumes. I did one last summer that was set in the 1700s. That's what we shot at Smithfield Plantation. And we had all the corsets and the big floofy dresses, and we had a lot of props and things. And I mean, people are working with those items and seeing the story take place, and the crew seems to really get into it normally. And the actors, of course. I don't often get to interact with the viewers, but when I do, it's really exciting to see kids and people my age who are interested in it and are relating to it, maybe.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, and Chloe, do you have any advice for historical societies or preservation groups? There's a lot around the state who are concerned citizen groups who are working to help preserve the history in their backyards. And do you have any advice for maybe what they can or should be doing going forward to continue to attract younger audiences or document the history that they're trying to save?
Well, one thing I think is to be open to it being filmed. Most of the time people are very open, but I think it really helps when people see it on film. They see that it's a place where they can go and visit. And I think that is a huge thing that some places don't always do.
Sure.
Yeah, we've kind of noticed that too. We've had some films of some of our sites, short films, and it seems like people really, they really enjoy that. They're sitting at home, especially now, and it's sort of like a little trip for them that they can go see these places. So
Yeah. And then it becomes a location as well from a film, and that can bring people in, and then they see the history for themselves.
Right. Yeah. So often I feel like the reference point for most folks would be a TV or film. Like how often we'll be discussing a certain program or theme at one of our historic sites or one of our educational programs, and they're like, "Oh, that's like that movie," which is good and bad. It kind of depends, I guess, on the movie.
If that's what gets them, then
the ends definitely justify the means in that sense, for sure. And there was a TV show that AMC did called Turn a few years ago, which I imagine you were a fan of, as we all were, and they filmed here at our headquarters building, Nicole Diggs' house.
Oh, really?
And it was so cool. We didn't get a whole lot of work done that day. It was so fun to watch them kind of doing their thing, and it was just incredible what goes into it. I mean, it took them literally 15 hours to shoot a 2-minute scene.
Yeah, it's a long process, longer than people tend to guess.
For sure. It definitely takes a long time. Well, and along those lines, Chloe, what's next? Are there any projects or upcoming things you'd like to discuss or plug?
Well, I have my film that's shot at Smithfield Plantation. It's called Wayward, and it's not quite done yet, but it will be done in January. And hopefully it'll be online for people to see. set during the Revolutionary War. So that's exciting.
Fantastic. Well, and also from like a logistical standpoint, if there was like a local preservation group that's all volunteer that might not have a ton of like a big budget, is there a certain camera or editing system that you might recommend that more or less beginners could use? Or do you have any advice about how people could get started?
I'm not the techiest with cameras myself. Normally I'm writing and directing, and I'm normally not behind the camera, but I use a DSLR when I do film because I will sometimes do promos and things. And that's pretty accessible and easy to use. Most people use that to take still photos, but if you get the right brand, they can do really good video as well. And I do edit a lot. That is a thing that I do often just in my day-to-day. And I use Adobe, but that's probably not the most accessible.
Right. Yeah, we've been using Adobe as well, which just because it's part of the Adobe Creative Suite, where you know, for folks out there, it includes like Photoshop for editing photos and also Adobe Premiere for editing videos. And it's a little bit of a steep learning curve, but I think it's worth it. You know, it's definitely kind of a cut above the rest. I know some folks will use iMovie or Final Cut Pro, but I think that in the next year, certainly video is kind of the name of the game for a lot of museums and nonprofits. And I think even, you know, hopefully after the pandemic, even as things quote unquote get somewhat back to normal, I think digital programs and videos will continue to be a need and a way to deliver your mission and your services. So we're all trying to learn as we go here, Chloe.
Yeah.
Well,
So we
like
need to,
sorry, go ahead, Sonia.
we need to hire Chloe to do some films for us.
That's right.
That's so
I would
unique.
love that.
No, absolutely. We'll be in touch because I'm sure there's a ton of opportunities coming up as we're trying to, you know, do everything digitally now. But like a website or something that you would want to steer people to check out your work.
Oh yes, I have ChloeSheltonFilms.com, and I'm also on Instagram and Facebook under Chloe Shelton Films. So
excellent. Well, Sonia, did you have any other questions or?
I guess not, but I'm serious about you doing some films. I mean, I think that would be great.
I would love that.
I love this intersection of art and history and preservation. I think we're dipping our toes into this a little bit with this barn quilt trail thing that we're doing, which we're just now really getting started on that. But people really react to art, and if you can use that to add another layer behind that and draw, you know, bring the history to them through the art, you know, I think it's great. And I have, as we've been talking, I have a lot of ideas coming about some great films. I could see you filming some people at a tobacco barn, you know, like stringing the tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly the opportunities are endless going forward, you know, as we do more video, and it opens you up to wider audiences. You know, I think that when you have only in-person programs, it kind of limits your reach, but if you can post things online, you know, you'll take off all over the world, literally. So, well, Chloe, many congratulations on being the Young Preservationist of the Year, and we apologize that the in-person dinner didn't work out this year, obviously, but we're hoping to do something in person next year, and but we certainly appreciate all the work you're doing around the state.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so honored.